I am so excited that I got to spend time with my good friend Estelle Barnes today. Estelle is currently serving as the Chief Customer Officer for RSI. She has been in the healthcare space for well over 34 years. Most people that are on the provider side know Estelle. She's a great person, a great friend, a great person to know in the industry, and she's really starting to talk about what happens when you have an uncivil workplace, the impact that that has on your organization. And then we talk about how we can collaborate better in U.S. healthcare, in our workplaces, and at home. And it's just a great episode. I'm so excited that I got to spend so much time with her today, and I hope you enjoy it. Estelle, thank you so much for being here. I love having you in our home. It worked out great that you were here in town. We got to do this in person. In person's always better, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Finally.
Yes. I know.
With our schedules, it's great.
It's funny that we live in the same town, and yet most of the time when we see each other, it is not at all in Naples, which is where we both live.
The same town, same city, and only 6.4 miles from each other.
As you found today,
yes.
when you put it in your GPS.
Exactly.
So true. So at Healthcare Harmony, we really like to talk about just the ways that people collaborate and how outcomes are better achieved. Either we get better outcomes, we get the same outcomes with less energy, with less angst, whatever those things are, when we play better together. So at Trend, we kind of have it's better when we play together attitude. And so on Healthcare Harmony, we try to talk about what are all the ways that we can play better together. And I know you have a lot of thoughts in your experience and on this specific topic in the workplace. So can you just talk a little bit about what you're passionate about in the spirit of collaboration?
Yes, happy to. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for inviting me to participate. I am very passionate about relationships and harmony and civility in the workplace. I've recently had quite a number of sessions that we've given at various conferences about incivility in the workplace and the cost of that. But it permeates throughout our life, not just in the workplace, but how we engage others in general. Mm-hmm. So at work specifically, having a culture of civility and creating a culture around that, but also in how you engage any individual throughout your day. It's just an important topic for me in general. I've been in healthcare for 34 years. 24 of those years have been directly in client engagement, client experience, how you engage others. A big quote of mine is people won't remember what you say, they won't remember what you do, but they definitely will remember how you made them feel. Yeah. And I've based a lot of my work and a lot of my interactions with others on that quote and that method of interacting. And it directly affects outcomes, it directly affects happiness in the workplace, it affects wellness, so many things. So very important topic to me. So I appreciate being here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's dive in, right? Okay. Let's kind of get deep. So can you maybe share with me when you think about, let's take this in a positive.
Perfect.
We won't necessarily talk about the incivility, but let's talk about civility, right? And what behaviors can someone kind of be intentional about in their 20 square feet that helps promote civility and collaboration in the workplace?
So much. And civility, just from a basic understanding, is treating others with courtesy, respect, professionalism. Let's just get the definition of civility. So every engagement that you have with anyone, whether you're passing them in the hallway or you're engaging with them in a project. Things that can be done, particularly in healthcare, I think a great example is the former CEO of Ochsner Health in Louisiana had a 5-10 rule that they implemented organization-wide. If you were within 10 feet of anyone, you were to look them in the eye and smile. If you were within 5 feet, you were to say hello. That simple change in their culture created a dynamic that improved overall patient engagement because it affected families, it affected patients, it affected coworkers. So it really made a difference in their organization. To bottom line that, it really starts with leadership, and it starts with the culture that you create. The culture you create really starts with purpose and your core values. We all individually have some set of core values that we probably have had since we were 4 or 5 years old. Tell the truth, do the right thing. Those core values create who we are as individuals. Companies, very similarly, when they create their purpose and share that with their employees, and they create their set of core values, they are defining the behavior that they find acceptable in their organization. So it really starts from the leadership perspective, implementing core values, implementing a purpose statement that your employees can get around, but also what you tolerate, what you measure, what you accept is really impactful to a positive work environment. So some fundamentals could be that you are creating an importance of civility in the workplace. How do you do that? You would create a code of conduct around civility. Potentially have employees sign a civility code of conduct document so that we're all committed to the same behaviors, same core values. So there are those types of things that can be done, but it really starts with leadership. And it's not just about having core values and a mission statement and a vision statement that appears on your website, in your about page on your website. It's not just about that. It's not about, splashing your vision statement and your core values on the wall and not necessarily living up to those. It starts with leadership, embodying those values and living them and showing them, displaying them throughout the day, and then making it part of the conversation with employees on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So.
Yeah, it's really about being intentional about it. And so the 5-10 or 10-5 rule that you just described, I'm sitting here thinking about how many times I have walked past someone, probably in my own head, right? I'm thinking about something and it's not intentional, right? I'm not intentionally ignoring someone or whatever. I'm just all caught up in whatever it is I'm thinking about in the moment. But to that other person, they don't know that. They don't know what I'm thinking about.
Absolutely.
So what you're really describing, as I'm understanding it, is just being very intentional about your actions and how your actions and behavior impacts other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We've, once upon a time, leisure was considered a great thing, taking your time. We've flipped that on its head, and we've created an environment in any industry where busyness is rewarded. Busyness is perceived as important. That person's important. If they're busy, they're important. And when you're busy, it's difficult to be intentional. Rewarding busyness as success impedes your ability to be authentic and present with people. So I think in addition to core values and understanding civility in the workplace, what you reward as well. If busyness and working all hours of the night, and if those perceptions are rewarded in your organization, it will affect culture, it will affect civility, it will affect your overall environment. So it's the busyness that gets us.
Yeah, that's so
We're
true.
in our head, we've got a lot going on. A way to overcome that is to utilize it in your everyday interactions. So I travel quite a bit, you travel quite a bit. If I pass the housekeeper in the hotel, I'm very intentional to always say good morning, good afternoon. I taught my children that. I remember I attended a conference that they were fortunate enough to go with me, and they passed, and she said good morning, and my boys just ran right by. I made them come back, say hello to her, and then we continued on to our room. And it's just something that I've always tried to do. I think if you incorporate small changes like that in your day-to-day, you become more aware of how just a smile can affect someone.
Well, it's so true. And I know for myself that when I'm feeling overly stressed or overwhelmed, then my capacity for what I'm just going to call kindness, right? My capacity for kindness toward others is diminished because I'm so, I'm trying to conserve energy. I'm, maybe more moody. I don't want to engage with someone because, whatever reason. And that culture, to your point, right? If you have a culture that is oppressive in that way, then your individuals don't have as much capacity for kindness, and not just kindness to, like you said, to somebody on the street, but also the ability to extend grace to someone else with it, whether they feel slighted or not, instead of being able to say like, oh, that person's behaving in a way that is inconsistent with my experience with them. They must be feeling stress, versus someone offended me or someone hurt my feelings or whatever, which I think is so important in a culture.
Absolutely, and I often get the question at the end of a lot of our sessions, what can we do on a day-to-day basis, what can I do? And it gets back to what you've just said. It's the filters that you use on a daily basis. We're all very busy, we all have a lot of priorities, but what you ground your personal core values in really does come out. Having patience with individuals, giving them grace, as you just said, from a collaboration perspective, and being able to harmonize in an organization and work collaboratively, not only internally but externally. You really have to have the filter to allow people to share their thoughts and be open to all possibilities. And that takes practice. It's not easy. We all are very busy. It's not easy.
Yeah, and it takes a little bit of bravery too.
It does.
Right? Because sometimes, things get sideways and you have to intentionally put them back on the right track. And I think about our history, right, and how we started with really just such misunderstanding of each other.
We did.
And I give you credit for getting us back on the right path, because you very intentionally and very bravely said, I don't want this to be our relationship.
Yeah.
And since then, we realized that the way that we understood each other was just not accurate.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And how much stronger are we as a result?
I am very grateful that you were open to the conversation and that we were able to have that. And our relationship is beyond what I ever expected.
Yeah.
I think we were a result of the environment that we were in as well. And I think that's another key point for leaders is the behaviors that you're displaying, the culture that you allow, the civility or uncivil actions that you allow in an environment affects every interaction that your employees are having with you and with others. What you allow persists. It creates training and examples for your next generation of leadership. And you want them to be open and honest and caring and patient and all of those wonderful qualities that you need in a highly productive team. But if you allow an environment where uncivil behavior is acceptable, you create leaders that think that behavior is okay and not taking the time to understand each other. So if you want really productive, really successful teams, it's worth the investment in the culture to create that.
And do you have any, in your talks, do you have like case studies? Do you have examples? Do you have any data-driven models around how that impacts an organization?
Yes, there is a fantastic TED Talk to get you started on this topic as a leader. If you're just putting your toe in the water on this, Christine Porath wrote a fantastic book called Mastering Civility. And as a result of that publication, she has a great TED Talk in which she explains civility in the workplace and the impact that it can have, the cost of incivility when it occurs. Specifically, she talks about studies that she did with respect to the reduction of work, the work that an individual will put forth if they experience incivility in the workplace. An 80% reduction in overall work effort occurs when you experience incivility in the workplace. 60% took time off. They just couldn't handle it. 12% leave the organization based on the study that they did. They were also contacted by Cisco Corporation. So based on some of the components of the study, and Cisco did not take all of them. They only took several components from their study, applied it to their organization, and determined they were losing $12 million a year for incivility alone.
Wow.
Just the interactions that employees were having with each other, leaders that they allowed to create environments like that, quite impactful.
Yeah, wow, that's staggering. Very interesting.
And the statistics also address not just you as an individual experience the uncivil actions, it's if anybody witnesses it. So I have a really great story about how impactful just seeing uncivil behavior in a work environment can affect your work effort. We had an audience member in one of our sessions at a conference. We usually do an open session where we allow people to talk, and then we ask them to share the stories that they experienced. And it's staggering the number of, we never have enough time to get all the stories in the room of what people are experiencing. But this particular individual was brave enough to stand up and say that she was in a senior leadership meeting at an organization that she was an executive. Several executives around the room, probably 10 or so, and the CEO leading the meeting. And talking about some work effort, the CEO prodding his team kind of said, well, to a particular female leader, well, if you can't handle that work, I can get another individual from another area, kind of a rival situation, I can get her to do it. And based on the interaction that she described, assuming the other woman was probably somewhat overweight or a larger woman, that senior executive in this meeting with other executives, her rebuttal to that was, well, if you're going to get her to do it, you need to stock up on your ho-hos. So for those that may not know, those are snack cakes, but just to have, you could feel all of her emotion when she was sharing the story, how offended she was that there was laughter in the room after a comment like that. It just described the overall acceptable behavior in that organization. She did shortly leave, she said, after that, but it gave her an indication of what in that organization they found acceptable behavior. Obviously, incivility at its finest there.
Well, and when you, to your point, I mean, if you witness something
Correct.
like that, you can assume that in the next room that you're not in, something like that will be said
That's right.
about you, right? That's what's really, I mean, it's obviously disheartening to hear something like that about someone that you know, or maybe don't even know, right? But then that kind of talk, you're like, well, when I'm not in the room, what gets said about me,
Right.
right?
Right. It's just the impact to just witnessing it is significant. The other thing that we probably didn't have 20 to 30 years ago were specific CPT codes that now address workplace issues, whether that's stress in the workplace. There's a particular Z code for issues with your boss that create undue stress.
Really? I did not know that.
7 to 10 Z codes within our CPT codes that accommodate for stressful work environment, issues related to work environment. So yeah,
What do
staggering.
you think, I mean, do you think that that is a function of we're just more open and honest about it and we want something different from our workplace? Or do you think that we have become, like, culturally we have more incivility in the workplace?
Yeah, there's a great Forbes article that just came out earlier this year about how we're having to cope with a larger, not just in the workplace, incivility everywhere. I mean, in traffic, 10 years ago, I didn't have the concerns I have just in traffic. If you make a wrong turn or pull out in front of someone, the hostility and anger and just the inability to deal with that. With respect to incivility in the workplace, we're dealing with a different work environment altogether, where the majority of our staff are remote. So you have to consider tools that bring them together, that foster that team effort, that camaraderie, the collaboration. And working remotely makes it more difficult to do that. So again, there are tools and things that you can do. For us, we've invested in our culture in ways that bring that team together. So we have employees typically have a 40-hour work week. In our company, they typically have a 35-hour work week. Why is that? Because the other 5 hours in that week are spent investing in them. So we have Wellness Wednesdays where they can come together. It's completely volunteer that you join. And the topics vary. They could be mental health. They could be, how to get through a to-do list. They could be your personal finances. Whatever Wellness Wednesday topic is brought up, that's an hour they may take to do that. An hour spent talking to a leader, doing an SSC. So we have a start, stop, continue process at our organization where employees are, the senior leadership team, roughly 40 individuals, take a list of names each quarter, and we're responsible for engaging those employees in an SSC meeting, start, stop, continue. And what that looks like is I would contact that employee, ask to meet with them, set something on the calendar, and talk to them about what they feel our organization should start doing. What do you think creatively that we should start doing that would make your work life better, that you think would benefit the company and any of its core values? What do you think we should stop doing? What do you think that is affecting us negatively, affecting you negatively on the job? What should we stop doing? And then what should we continue doing? The answer's the same a lot of the times. It's our monthly staff meeting where we give away money and have a lot of fun, but start, stop, continue. And then at the end of that SSC meeting, they have to grade us, 1 to 10.
Okay.
7's not allowed because that's a cop-out.
Yeah.
So they grade us 1 to 10, and then we submit all of those results as leaders to our HR department. What we have just implemented is the Artificial Intelligence Institute at the University of South Carolina, which is in Columbia, where our corporate office is located. They have partnered with us to take all of the data from our SSCs that have been documented since its inception, and now we are able to run that through an AI model that they've created for us that allow us to tailor our questions based on previous answers for a particular employee.
Oh, interesting.
So if I've engaged Sally Smith, or she has engaged 4 of our leaders and given 4 different SSC feedback, it now will take all 4 of those and formulate questions specifically around those things that specifically concern her. How does that affect, culture and civility? Letting people know, when we take core fundamental human needs, people want to be heard. They want to feel as though they're needed. Those small actions you take as an organization will impact overall culture and civility in the workplace. So I could go on and on the things that we do to try to bring the team together.
I am curious, because I know you have a heart for customers.
I do.
So is there any parallel or any learnings that you've had from this journey that you've been on and what's happening inside of your organization and how that has impacted your customers' perception of your organization or anything like that?
Sure. So 24 of my 34 years have been spent specifically in client engagement and client experience. I was very fortunate early in my career to work for a leader who believed strongly in behavioral profiles, DISC or any other, and she provided us a great deal of training on DISC language. So early on, I didn't really understand what that meant or how impactful it would be to my overall perception of others and my career. But learning DISC early on in my early 20s and mid 20s, I guess, allowed me to engage clients at their level. So when you receive any type of behavioral training, you should be able to assess somebody else's behavioral style, understand your own, and then collaboratively be able to work with them. So early on, I was hired to be over client experience, basically a laptop, a credit card, and good luck. Go travel and see all of our clients.
Figure it out.
Figure it out. So when you walk in a room to try to develop a relationship out of thin air, is pretty impossible. You have to have some skill set to say, okay, what do I know about this person? But truly, from a behavioral perspective, how do they receive information and how do they give information? Because it's a very different approach you would use interacting with a CFO than necessarily a VP of revenue cycle. They receive information potentially different and give information differently. So having that training was truly a foundation for everything I did from there. As a result of that training, collaboratively engaging with a client, understanding how they wanted to receive information. So a CFO is looking for very particular things, but assessing his behavioral style to understand how much time I should spend in that office with him, how I should deliver the information, and then get out. Versus another behavioral style where that person wanted to talk a little about the football game over the weekend and those things before diving right in. So being able to assess kind of the right approach as a leader is really important and can directly impact their ability to see you and trust that you are, people do business with people they like and people they trust.
That's right.
And if they can obtain that in their interactions with you, delivering key client information, whether that's outcomes data, in your case, the collaboration between the payer and the provider, delivering that information becomes much easier for them to receive it and distill it if that relationship has existed. They've been able to form that with you. So I tried to do that in every interaction that I had. I think it goes back to your personal core values, how you treat people, how you perceive people, how you engage with people, and then utilizing some of the tools like the DISC, and then understanding your industry and being able to deliver that message in a way that they can receive it. And it changes for every audience. So as a result of that, I think that present day, I'm able to share our core values, share our company beliefs, how we go about engaging our employees, which is our most important asset. And then when I am talking with a client, I'm delivering that message and kind of pairing that with their vision statement for their organization. I was in a meeting this week with a faith-based multi-hospital health system, and the sisters that make the decisions for culturally for the organization is very important to them. Being able to share our core values, being able to share our purpose statement, and then connect the dots with what their mission and vision is, change the dynamic in the room this week. So.
Yeah. Well, you feel like more of a partner, right?
Right.
That's right.
So the use of partner when it comes to our clients it has been a shift for me since joining RSI. I've always used that word.
Yeah.
But at RSI, we believe that we're not their partner. We don't own a piece of the healthcare system. We're not an executive sitting in the C-suite that is going to go in the board meeting and answer for those. So we stopped using the word partner, and we now describe that relationship as being your best employee.
Oh.
And what is the definition of your best employee? You can give them anything and they'll run with it. They come to you with great ideas. They get projects done. You can count on them when you need them. You give them the extra work that you need to get through quickly. All of those very positive things. And we describe ourselves in that way. That's who we want to be to our clients. We want them to think of us when they need help with something. We want them to think of us when they know the project has to get done. There's no choice. We want them thinking of RSI. So we want to be their best employee.
Wow, that's a great dynamic shift, right? And I mean, certainly we've all used that word partner to really kind of reinforce that we want to have
It's hard to
aligned
break.
incentives and, we kind of win together, lose together kind of approach. But I like that. That's great. I like how intentional you are about it, right? Just this is what we believe.
Yeah.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and we try to be about every aspect of when it boils down to our culture and how we want to be perceived in the marketplace, by our employees, by potential employees. We recently went through a round of interviews for Chief Operating Officer. That was interesting. And our CEO being the great leader that he is, had several of us around the table, brought the COO candidates in. And I had recently read a book, and I won't use foul language on your podcast, but it's the no a-hole rule.
Yeah.
And I brought that up during the interview. I said, we have a dynamic culture we're very proud of. We protect it. Many of the leaders on our leadership team came from environments that weren't that great. We all know what a toxic environment looks like. And we decided as a team we would not allow that here. We will not allow it here. So during the interviews, I bring the book up. And I said, there's this great book, and we have a great culture. And what are you, as a chief operating officer, going to have to check at the door to embed yourself into this culture? What characteristics, what previous experiences, influences have you had that won't work, and you're going to have to check those at the door? And the responses to that question were so interesting. You had some that were quiet. They couldn't think of anything. And that tells me a lot.
Yeah.
And then you had others that were very humble and immediately said, based on everything I've seen here in your organization, I know I've got to work on, kind of being the person that's shouting, we need to get this done and you need to do that. And I know I need to work on that. I need to work on how I'm going to communicate in this environment and I loved that they got the concept very quickly, and it gave them an opportunity to say, can I fit in here?
Yeah.
As much as we're evaluating you should also be evaluating us that you can make it here. That's
right. It's funny. That's a great question to ask in an interview. One of my favorites has always been, can you tell me about a time that you failed?
That's a great
And people's reaction to that word, not, if you say it, can you tell me about a time that you missed a target? People react very differently than when you use the word failed. And it tells a lot about how honest people are with themselves, how vulnerable they're willing to be, how fragile their ego is, and whether or not they'll be a good fit, culturally.
Yeah.
Because if your ego is so fragile that you can't admit that you have failed, like this is going to be a long road,
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think self-assessment in any situation when it comes to the leadership skills you're bringing to the table and to your organization are important. There is, I mentioned earlier, Christine Porath has a great TED Talk. In that, she offers an assessment tool that you can use. So if you're listening to this thinking, well, I'm a civil person. I think I say hello to people as I pass them in the hall. I do pretty good at that. Really, incivility is in the eye of the beholder.
That's right.
If someone is texting while they're talking to you, it may be uncivil, be perceived as uncivil to you. For others, it may be perfectly acceptable. So it is in the eye of the beholder. So if you're not really sure and you wanted to, there's a great self-assessment on, I actually have it here, Christine Porath's website, that you can go on, and it's confidential. You can log into her website and take this self-assessment, and it asks you questions like, and I took it, and I was like, I had no idea that, and I won't use one specific to me, but let's just use one to say, consistently late to meetings.
Oh, yeah.
That can be perceived as incivility. Not paying attention if you're checking your calendar during a meeting and there's somebody that spent time preparing their presentation and genuinely probably scared, has some anxiety related to presenting, and you're busy on your phone not paying, that's incivility. Those little actions can impact an organization. So the self-assessment's just a great tool to say, let me evaluate my behavior, because it does begin with us, ourselves as individuals, and then what we bring to the leadership table.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm listening to all of this and I'm thinking about, and you've heard so many of my stories when I had a mentor, right? Like that first experience that I had with him and the mirror that he held up, not just what I thought I was doing, but how other people perceived that behavior. And I'm thinking about that self-assessment. And one of the things that I have really, really struggled with is interrupting people, right? My brain works really quickly, and I'm a chatty Cathy. And so I've figured out what the rest of your sentence is going to be. So I'll just, I'll just jump in and go ahead and move this along. And how hard I have worked to try to not interrupt people. I mean, and it's hard, especially in a remote environment, because you miss some of the cues. You can't really tell, is somebody about to speak, or are they about to wrap up, that kind of thing. And but one of the things that I have noticed is that now that I have tried really, really hard to not interrupt others, I get very irritated when I get interrupted, right? When someone else is not. So it's to your point, we're always a work in progress.
Absolutely.
Always.
And I love that you have that self-assessment that you've done, and you're working on it. And it is a daily process. For you as a leader and the CEO of your company, my co-presenter, Carrie Cornicelli, well-respected CFO in our industry, she tells a story. She would go into meetings and she'd immediately start rattling off, this is what we need to do. And she said, I bring this team of people together, and when it comes time to say, does anybody have any questions, any ideas, nobody's speaking. Finally, one of her employees was brave enough to say, can I talk to you? When you're in meetings, you might want to just go around the room, let everybody, because when you start off by giving the answer, nobody is brave enough to raise their hand to say, well, I think we should do it this way, because you've already kind of, so all of those things, not interrupting, but giving people a chance to speak, I think is just, as a leader, you gain so much more.
And asking more questions than you give answers is really important. And it's something I struggle with. I love, I love to solve a problem. I love to figure out the solution.
I love that about you.
And it's not, my intention is not egotistical. It's really just, I'm trying to be helpful. And making sure that I'm not leading with a solution, to your point, and just asking, trying to ask people, what do you think we should do? And do you have any questions or concerns about that approach? Then go do it, right? You don't need me to solve it. You already know. You already know what to do. And that's hard.
Yeah, and it circles back to what we kind of started with, is understanding the various behavioral styles and how tendencies that you may have, or your own behavioral style, can impact your interaction with another individual. And I'll share a story. I won't say when you told me this story or in what capacity or what employee, but you, at one point, I was very impressed with the way you were interacting with an employee, and it was difficult. For the same reasons you've already mentioned. I wanted to get this solved. She just wasn't coming along, and I'm struggling. And when I spoke to you about it, you were already working through how you could be different to get what you needed from her, versus being impatient. And you were doing the you're self-assessing on a regular basis, and you're very well read, and it's one of the things I admire about you is that you're the first one to say, I'm struggling with this, but I'm going to figure out a way to solve this and solve it in a way that I can collaborate with this other individual, because you did that with us. You did this with this employee that you were, and I just see it in you on a regular basis, and it's an attribute that more organizations need in their senior-most leadership.
I appreciate that. It really comes down to kind of a philosophy that I adopted a long time ago, which is, it is so easy to point to something external, another person, a situation or whatever, and be like, that needs to change before this situation can get better. And I really adopted, I have to first look at myself. I have to first look at, how did I contribute to the outcome? If I got an outcome I didn't like, I probably had something to do with that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so just really thinking through, and what we talk about at Trend is, what are you doing in your 20 square feet? Like, how do you own that in such a way that you are never in control of all the things that you would like to be in control of? Control is a fallacy, right? And so the only thing we are in control of is ourselves. And so how can I adjust my approach? How can I adjust my tone? How can I ask better questions? How can I set better expectations? How can I have a vulnerable and brave conversation because I want a different outcome? Like that, to me, is really where harmony happens.
Absolutely. And it takes a leader to start that in the culture. So you doing that allows your employees to do that. That allows their interactions with your clients, the opportunity for that as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really important is how you disagree. And so I think that everything has a light and a dark side, right? And so all the wonderful harmony with civility is all the light side. The dark side is you still have to disagree. You still have to have creative tension, or you're not growing. You still have to, figure out how to marry multiple perspectives to get the best outcome. And so one of the things that I'm so proud of my team about is, they do not hold back when they disagree. And sometimes we disagree spiritedly. And I try to always thank people for disagreeing with me. And I think as an executive team, allowing yourself to be influenced by someone else's perspective is so important. So if I go into a meeting, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO or whatever role you're in, but if you go into a meeting with a preconceived notion of what the right answer is, and you fight for that answer, right? That sets the tone of how people are going to interact with you.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go into the meeting and you may still have a preconceived notion of what the right answer is, but allow someone else's perspective to change yours and be influenced by somebody else, whether they are a peer to you or in another department or maybe even down the ladder, right? I think that is so important to the culture of the organization.
And that creates high-functioning, highly productive teams.
Yep.
Absolutely. There's a great reference to the former CEO of Campbell Foods. He joined the organization, Press Ganey scores were bottom. It was a terrible situation. He gets in there, and even the first day when he arrived, and Christine Porath describes this in her TED Talk, there are these gates and all the security guards, and he goes, it felt like a prison. It felt toxic. And he began his town halls with the employees saying, we will aggressively pursue results, but we will do it with civility. And he focuses on results and focuses on people in the heart, combining those two. They became top 100 workplaces. In his tenure at Campbell Foods, he sent over 30,000 personal notes to employees.
Wow.
He was known for and they were achieving great results. They definitely had the results, but he was known for the civility and the culture that he created and the day-to-day interactions with employees. 30,000 personal notes.
That's crazy. That's great.
And he influenced a whole level of leadership that ended up doing the same.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. I'm currently reading a book. Have you ever heard of Jim Lohr? Do you know who Dr. Jim Lohr is? So he is a sports psychologist, I think is the right word, and he wrote the toughness training for sports, and it's really about the psychology around being an elite athlete, which was a great book. And I personally found a lot of parallels between the toughness that you need to be an athlete, to perform at a certain level, with the toughness that you need to be a leader performing at a certain level. The mental acuity, the ability to rev up, rest, the ability to give yourself grace and move on, all those kinds of things. But anyway, I'm reading a second book of his, and the foreword was written by the CEO of Levi Strauss. And it's so great, and it talks about how, it's one thing to achieve a certain dollar threshold, shareholder value, whatever that is. But, he talks about what is even more important is how you do it, and how your employees feel, how your customers feel. What are you standing for in the world, in the U.S., in the market, whatever that is, like orienting yourself around purpose and like sticking true regardless of, maybe it's unpopular, or maybe you've got to wait on the results, right? It's not the quick fix. But he uses the phrase, I'd rather make the right hard decision than the easy wrong one.
Absolutely.
And I think that those are the things, to your point, people remember how you make them feel.
Always.
Like it's so important as a leader to keep all that top of mind.
We are so proud of our culture and our core values. Our CEO recently published a book. Brent Rollins is our CEO. He published a book called Let's Go. It highlights that journey to our core values, but it really highlights our journey to discovering our purpose. And our purpose statement is around our employees growing together, but having fun together and achieving our outcomes for our clients. But the fun component was the one that was like, really, we're going to make that part of our purpose statement? And he's often said, Estelle, you're the most serious person in our company, right? You need to have more fun. We left a presentation this week and we're walking out and I feel pretty good about it. He goes, yeah, but did you have fun? You know, I think there's a balance and component to that as well that you have to have. And he's teaching me that, at 54 years old and a 34-year career in healthcare, he's teaching me, you can have fun. You can achieve results. You can have all of those characteristics as a leader, but you got to have a little fun.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, we, our leadership team, we come together. We try to come together once a quarter in person. We're all over the U.S., so we have to travel to come together anyway. So we try to pick a destination and we come together. And we were together in June. Actually, when I saw you in Las Vegas, we stayed over a day and we had our leadership meeting. And then we have kind of a big family dinner after our leadership meeting. And I was sitting kind of at the end of the table and I was tired. Like I had been at that conference all week.
Right.
I was hitting a wall. I was so tired. And I was just sitting at the end of the table and the noise, we were in a private dining room and there were 22-ish people, maybe 24 in the room. And the decibel of the voices and the laughter, I mean, it was like, and I just like sat there for a moment and I was like this is why we do it. I mean, just how much people genuinely like each other. They laugh. There's good-natured ribbing after a long day. You know what I mean? It's just one of those moments that I'm so grateful for the people that I'm surrounded by.
And
It's
I love
amazing.
that you are having an opportunity to create a culture like that. I think anybody experiencing that, you know it when you feel it. You know when it's right. And if you've ever been in an environment that it's not, you know the difference for sure.
Yeah,
So
that's so true. And I feel like it is, my number one job is to protect it like so fiercely, right? So fiercely. Because it is really special and it doesn't come along all that often.
yeah.
It's awesome. So I'm going to change direction here a little bit and just ask you, you've been in healthcare for a very long time, oriented toward the provider side as long as I've known you. I assume that's kind of always been, I think that's right. Yeah.
First 10 years on the provider side and then yeah.
Yeah, and then on the vendors for providers.
That's right.
Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So we at Trend are on this journey trying to change the narrative about how payers and providers think about each other, how they talk to each other, and how they collaborate.
That's an undertaking.
And yeah, it is. We're slaying dragons for sure. But it's one of those things that I realize when you talk about what is something that you have to check at the door, you asked that question.
Yes.
You know, one of the things that I've realized that I had to check at the door was a lot of misconceptions about what happens on the payer side, because I never really had that direct experience. I just heard it, assumed it, maybe was taught it intentionally or unintentionally. And what I've discovered is that just like the story of me and you, where we had just deep misunderstandings of each other, the same is true between payers and providers. And there are bad actors on both sides, but we shouldn't let the bad actors dictate how we collaborate in the market. And so I'm curious, from your point of view, is there something that's top of mind after your 34 years of experience in healthcare that if we could talk about this in a different way that would help payer-provider collaboration, what would that be?
That's a good question. I think you really worded that very well to say there are bad actors on both sides. So as much as having primarily been on the provider side, we want to believe that payers are the enemy and they just don't want to pay our claims and they want to keep all their profits. You have to look fundamentally, I think, in your organizations to determine, do you have the right individual interacting and engaging with that payer? So we have various levels of leaders that may be interacting from a contractual perspective, exchanging data and information, or encouraging and collaborating with the payer. Having the right people in the room that understand all of the characteristics we've just talked about.
Yeah.
Being able to engage with an individual that has a different view than you, being able to have a conversation and still remain civil. You hear so often about providers. I just heard one, and I can't recall the health system, but they dropped Anthem completely, you know, and the impact of that to the patient is dramatic. And I just thought, how does it get that far that you can't have at least two individuals come to the table that have the right mindset to say, we can figure this out. We can work together and figure this out. And again, referencing even our relationship, there is a path. Somebody just has to be brave enough, take the time to understand how the other party receives information and gives information to collaborate and get to where we need to be. Neither of us is going away.
That's right.
I remember very early on, my dad said, get into healthcare. The world is always going to need hospitals. Get into healthcare. It's a solid industry to be in. Hospitals aren't going anywhere. We need healthcare. That exists. Patients need to be covered with health insurance. We're not going anywhere. We've got to figure this out. And the fact that your team is working so hard on this is encouragement. But there's a lot of making sure the right people are at the table, collaborating and talking.
Yeah. Well, you have to start with trust. You have to start from a position of trust.
Exactly.
And I think that is there's just decades of mistrust that has, I call it emotional baggage. Like we have we as industry, in the industry, and I speak on the provider side, like it is not uncommon for me to have a conversation once a week with someone that tells me all the things that payers are intentionally doing to cause them harm. And I'm like, I just don't know that that's intentional. I think that, we've tried to regulate ourselves and policy ourselves kind of ad nauseum, and we've just created this giant ball of twine that nobody can see clearly through.
Well, and weaving that back into all of the discussion we've just had is we are creating the environment, the values of the next level of leadership. So if you think about our careers in healthcare, we've always been told that.
Always.
By our previous leaders and administration, and the people that were mentoring us and bringing us up in the industry were saying those things. So you've got, like you said, layers and layers of this.
Yeah.
There has to be someone, an organization, that decides this is not the truth. This is not the situation, and begin to change the culture.
That's right.
Begin to change, and how do you change a culture? You begin with core values, and you begin with educating, and you begin with holding people accountable to those. Same with breaking old ideas about the payer-provider relationship. I think we all were taught that, but there's an opportunity here to change it for sure.
Yeah. Well, I hope you and I can work together on that.
I would love to.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Well, Estelle, this has been such a rewarding conversation. We went through a lot of very honest conversations. I love what you're doing. I love your talks about civility in the workplace. It's so important. How we treat each other matters. Whether that's, like you said, whether that's at work or passing somebody in the airport, you know, the staff at the hotel, whatever that is. And I want to commend you for being brave enough to stand on a stage and talk about it.
Thank you.
And shine a light on it. And I just wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you so much. If I can leave your viewers with a couple of thoughts to say, I encourage you to view the TED Talk by Christine Porath. I think that's a beginning point in understanding. I encourage you to go to her website and do the self-assessment. I think it begins there. At the end of the day, if you can remember just a couple of things, some basic values that we've probably all heard about, you know, do unto others as you would have done unto you. It's a simple rule. If you use that in every interaction, you'll always do the right thing. And I have a good friend of mine, Colt Briner, who is coming out with his book, The Race to Relevance. And I love in his book that he talks about his mom telling him something as he was growing up and how he's incorporated that into his life. And I would encourage all of you with her quote by saying, do great things. Go do great things.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.